Welcome to the Healthcare Leadership Lab community. My name is Dr. Kathy Albert, and on behalf of my co-founder, Jeff Vargas, we want to welcome you to the HCLL community. Thank you for joining us on what is likely the end of a very busy day. Healthcare Leadership Lab believes in the power of community, and now more than ever, we need to support each other and be together on this journey. We are stronger when we're together. And that is why Jeff and I decided to create and continue to build and expand the platform of Healthcare Leadership Lab. Our mission is to provide programs, of which we have over 20, that offer healthcare workers in the many different aspects of the healthcare ecosystem to learn, engage, support each other, and grow your leadership capacities. Our programs are aimed toward individuals, teams, and organizations. We offer other opportunities to participate in some dialogue that pertains to the current state of affairs of the healthcare system, but also the systems themselves and how they impact us as individuals, healthcare workers in every different aspect of the healthcare ecosystem. Tonight is an interactive discussion, a key opinion leader dialogue, as we call it. Your questions are welcome, so please enter them in the chat box, which we will monitor during the program, but largely we'll answer them at the end. I'm hopeful you're here because you want to learn, engage, and maybe just meet your healthcare leadership lab community. If so, you're in the right place. Tonight, our discussion is on the power of pivot. So my question to you is, what does a pivot mean to you? For most people, a pivot is a movement, but the reality is when it's well executed, when it's well communicated, inclusive to include all individuals involved in the change, it's something more than a change, and it sets you up to do better in the future as an individual, team, and organization. And as you are familiar, I'm sure, healthcare is synonymous with change. And the pandemic has not only amplified the number of changes, but the pace by which we change. Jeff and I feel strongly that pivoting is one of the most powerful tools we can carry with us. Let me tell you a little bit about my co-founder. Jeff Vargas is a leadership and professional development expert. He's spoken to multiple audiences in the arenas of government and business and now in healthcare on many different topics pertaining to leadership and learning strategy. Tonight, we're going to talk about the power of pivot. Jeff, in my opinion, carries a wisdom and expertise outside of the healthcare arena, which offers a unique perspective and insight that I find very valuable, and I hope you do the same. Jeff, tell us a little bit about the power of pivot.
Kathy, it is a pleasure and an honor to be on this journey with you, creating and deploying the Healthcare Leadership Lab. As you mentioned, tonight we're talking about the power of pivot. And oftentimes when we think about pivot, what is the first thing that comes to mind for all of us is, well, Jeff, isn't a pivot really just a change? Aren't they really sort of the same thing? And I'm going to push back a little bit on that, because what Kathy and I have done in our research and our dialogue when we talk about pivot and the power of pivot is that it has its own special sort of definition, and one that we believe is very central and important in the healthcare community. We define a pivot as something that isn't reactive, but rather proactive. We see a pivot as an intentional, proactive action that's strategic in nature and is managed and communicated broadly. So I want you to stop for a moment and think about your day, your day in healthcare, and the kinds of interactions you have with your coworkers, with your peers, with patients, however you are connected to the healthcare ecosystem. And I want you to ask yourself the question, are there moments when I actually have an opportunity to pivot? And the reality is, in healthcare, there's multiple opportunities for you to identify an intentional proactive action, being strategic in nature, and managing it in a way that is effective and efficient and communicated broadly. So when we think about how do you pivot well in healthcare and why is it important, there's a number of things that come to mind for all of us. And I'd like you to think about identifying, creating, and deploying great pivot moments for all of you. So, how do you really do that? How do you pivot well? We think it's really involving three different things and then some steps. So let's talk about those things. First and foremost, as a healthcare worker and a provider, but before I get to these actionable steps, I just want to take a second and honor you. The work you are doing now, the things that you're involved in today are making a difference in the patients that you see, in the systems that you support, and in the healthcare capacity that individuals have. So I want to say thank you to all of you, particularly as we recently celebrated Nurses Week, and this month is Mental Health Awareness Month. We really want to focus and say thank you for the work that you do. And in part of saying that thank you, we want to help you to pivot well. So let's get to it. How do you pivot well in healthcare? We think there's three really important components. First and foremost is you give yourself the gift of mindset. Having the right mindset to pivot is your first and foremost step. Second is having the right strategy. Third is the tactic. So when we talk about a mindset, we want you to be thinking about your capacity to be prepared to pivot. Oftentimes, particularly in the healthcare arena, you are so strapped for time. There's one enemy that you have. He or she is called time, and you're often racing against it. And so you're saying to yourself already up front, look, Jeff, I'd pivot if I had more time. I'm going to challenge you on that because a strategic, well-intentioned action that's communicated broadly can be something that you can do with some foresight and forethought. So my question on the mindset area is, are you prepared to pivot, and are you willing to pivot? As you answer those questions, then we moved next to strategy. And so when we think about areas in our workplace where we can pivot, let me ask you this. Do you understand what's happening and why is it happening? Because in order for you to be strategic in your engagement, you have to understand all that's taking place. Here's a kind of more personal area when we talk about the strategy and pivot is, what will you gain or what will you lose based on the pivot that's taking place or the pivot you want to see take place? And finally, in the strategy area is, how are you positioning yourself to be proactive in the pivot moment? Third part to this is tactics. So we got a mindset shift. We have some strategy focused. Now we have some tactical activities. And what do they look like? First and foremost, we talked about time. Time is our enemy and maybe sometimes our friend, but do you understand the time frame for execution? Because particularly in healthcare, your moment to pivot, to offer the strategic idea, advice, well thought out and well communicated, there may only be a window to offer that in. Do you understand the time frame for execution? And do you understand the systemic steps to make the pivot work? The reality is all of us can pivot in healthcare. And let me give you an example for all of you who have some frontline contact with a patient or someone who is visiting a facility. How do you pivot well with your patients? Well, for those of you, for instance, who work in oncology, you might see 25 individuals a day who have cancer. But for your patient, they're the only individual that has cancer. And your capacity to help them pivot is based in large measure to your ability to be empathetic. So we believe there's a connection between care and empathy and your ability to pivot well in that environment. Some of you are thinking, well, look, Jeff, I'm here to treat my patients. I'm reacting to what they tell me. I'm saying, wait, give yourself the gift of pivoting in the moment, pivoting with your patient, giving them the opportunity to recognize a new mindset, helping them pivot to something that may be more positive while being empathetic. Maybe what they want you to do is just to listen. Listen to the fact that, they're experiencing some new aches and pains, some challenges in their mobility. Yes, you've talked to 20 people who've experienced the same, but you are now the one person with whom they're giving and fulfilling their trust. So let me ask you a question, or even let me suggest this. In your pivot moment, you have the opportunity for patients to really get to know you, because the bedrock of trust is based on vulnerability, familiarity, and communication. So let me ask you this question. Do your patients really, do they know you? Do they see you? Not just you in the lab coat and you, the individual who's identifying the next medication that they have, but do they see you? Are you able to help them engage in an empathetic way? Are you able to find the sweet spot of connectivity and communication? And are you properly applying emotional connectivity with your patients? And at times, properly applying emotional disconnectivity. And let's not just keep it in the patient front. You can pivot and pivot well with coworkers. So, my challenge to you is, when you think about your workplace, where are the opportunities for you to pivot, to engage and learn from your peers and support your peers and coworkers? So think about that for a second and say to yourself, okay, Jeff, I got an idea. I got to have a mindset. I got to have a strategy. I got to have some tactics. So, all right, can you help me a little bit more with the tactics? And yes, we can. There are 4 things that Kathy and I believe through our research you can do to pivot well in healthcare. Number 1 is you want to be able to plant. And when we talk about plant, you want to be able to plant yourself in what we call the soil of, the soil of ethics, right? And I want you to take a look at this. We want you to plant in the soil of ethics. And when you do that, you're able to make the right kinds of decisions about what you need to do forward. And what does that really mean? When you're planted in the soil of ethics, there's clarity about what you stand for, also clarity about what you stand against. And when you're in the soil of ethics, the reality is that you're giving a chance for the patients, your coworkers, your peers, your bosses to really see who you are. When you're planted in the soil of ethics, individuals trust you more and you trust them better as well. Second, we talk about moving with intention. So when you are pivoting well, you can identify clearly a desired outcome or objective. You have the ability to gather and sort information and really turn that information into opportunity. And you recognize and then execute against the importance of setting up a pivot system. And when we talk about a pivot system, really is how you are moving intentionally in a clear and concise way. All of us have the chance to, those of you connected in the healthcare community, have a chance to pivot. That means you get to respond every day rather than react. You get to be intentional in what you want to do rather than just be less than fluid in your activity. And then you get to set up the right systems for success. Second, we talk about engaging and adjusting, because the reality is that's the next thing you got to do. The reality is all of us have a chance to pivot well when we demonstrate and we connect to our own personal involvement. And you got to really take care of yourself and take care of your team. And Lisa's really going to talk about that in just a moment. And finally, in that area, in the 4 areas, is we talk about reporting out. Great pivots can't be kept to yourself. And you should be able to share pivot moments with your coworkers, with your peers, and with others in your industry. And how you do that, you embrace storytelling, embrace authenticity, embrace some level of vulnerability. And something that Dr. Albert and I talk about often is confident humility. You know your stuff, you're confident in your ideas of what should pivot be, but you're also humble enough to be curious and seek the thoughts and ideas and opinions of others. When you do all of that, when you have all that in front of you, you're able to plan, lead, delegate, and complete healthy pivots. And healthy pivots in healthcare look like providing better outcomes for you, better patient engagement with those who you serve, and better effectiveness and efficiency within your organization. pivot moments in healthcare can be, should be, and will be for all of you strategic in nature. They will involve you in all of your dimensions, in your professional capacity and those of your personal interests. You get to show people who you are, and you get to help them lead to a better place. Dr. Albert and I believe that all of us share the power of pivot when we're able to first recognize a pivot moment. Then we're able to establish sort of the right mindset and execute the right strategy and tactics. And then finally, as we mentioned earlier, we're able to practice the 4 acts of pivot: planning in the soil of ethics, moving with intention, focusing on the goals, setting up our pivot system, engaging, making adjustments, and finally reporting out. When we do that, we have monstrous success in our engagement. And talking about success, I'll turn it over to Dr. Albert. She's going to talk a little bit about Lisa, but she is a true expert that's going to help us figure out how do we take all this and make it practical in terms of our daily activities.
There's so much stress that we're exposed to on a daily basis, and I'm sure a lot of you have read the research that illustrates the cumulative and chronic stress leads to inflammation and chronic disease. So what Jeff and I talk about is, and the reason we're going to talk about the 5 pillars of health today with Lisa is because we need to make sure we are aligned and grounded and cared for before we can pivot. So I want to introduce you to a friend and dear colleague of mine, Lisa Ellsworth. She's a physician assistant and fellow from Dr. Andrew Wiles, University of Arizona Integrative Medicine. She's a health coach and treats cancer patients, but also healthcare workers. So Lisa, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You're great to have you. So I think the biggest question for me is I want to know about the 5 pillars of health and why you feel, you and I have had conversations about this on the side, but tell us a little bit about the 5 pillars of health and why they are critical to our health and physical and mental well-being as healthcare workers.
Well, first, thank you for allowing me to participate in this inaugural event. I love to talk about these subjects. I talk about them all the time with my patients, as well as Kathy mentioned, we talk amongst ourselves. There's many pillars, but I like to concentrate on the 5 health pillars. They are healthy eating, they are physical activity, good sleep, stress management, and I really like environmental health. So those are the top 5 that I talk about fairly regularly with anyone I come across.
Mm-hmm. So if we're to talk, let's kind of run through them if you're okay with that.
Sure.
And what we'd love to hear is, as a healthcare provider, Lisa and I both work in oncology and have for several years. So we are exposed and experience similar stressors. As far as the healthy environment, what we put in and on our bodies is super important. We know that there are a considerable amount of environmental toxins, not just outside, but at work, including cleaning chemicals, blue light. So tell us a little bit about the healthy environment as it pertains to our work experience.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we're exposed to a lot of chemicals throughout the day. I mean, this can be in, like we said, cleaning products. This can be in just the furnishings in our office. Our oncology nurses are handling, tubing, all of these chemicals. And even though we may not be touching them, they're in our environment and they set us up for potentially poor health. But there's things we can do, namely with these pillars, to help us clear that, help us stay healthy. So some of the things that are really important, at least that we can control, even if we can't control it in our environment, is making sure the things that we're consuming, the things that we are putting on or in us are healthy. And so, you want to make sure you're getting clean water. I am a big fan of not having it in bottles. Plastic bottles leach chemicals. Try to use more of a metal or a glass bottle. Get those chemicals out of there, because even a glass of a bottled water may have been sitting on a shelf, may have been in a warm truck. Those chemicals leak into that bottle. So that's a very basic thing. Making sure that you're eating food that is potentially organic. Yes, it costs a little bit more, but you can pick and choose using the environmental working group to find the most pesticide-ridden foods and trying to support those in your diet. So food intake. There are tons of chemicals in our health and beauty products that inflame us: parabens, phthalates, flame retardants on clothes. These are all things that we can minimize on our own and have control over. And again, the Environmental Working Group is an amazing resource with all kinds of public-facing databases to actually search and minimize those things.
Great. We'll put that resource in our PDF we're going to send to our attendees. So let's segue into healthy eating. Food is medicine, and there are a lot of population-specific wellness practices and research. Nutrition is the key to our mental health and brain health. There's a lot of research and scientific data supporting microbiome, how it affects it's our first line of defense, really, from a mental health, neurologic health standpoint. So can you elaborate a little bit more on healthy eating? And I've heard just the probiotics, GI system, Dirty Dozen, Clean 13.
Yep. Yeah. So what we put in us leads also into that environment, our internal environment, but healthy eating impacts many things. And one thing you really want to be cognizant of is when you're eating healthy, you do reduce inflammation in your body. And of course, the most well-studied, well-documented diet across the globe is the Mediterranean diet, which is a type of anti-inflammatory diet. It is going to be plant-based, not restrictive to plants, but you do want to choose plants more than you choose other things. You want to make sure you're getting adequate vegetables and fruits. Most people don't realize they should be getting a minimum of 5 servings of vegetables and fruits a day. Concentrating on whole grains, lean proteins, marine sources are better. They are full of omega-3 fatty acids, which also reduce inflammation. And then really trying to limit red meat intake. And if you do consuming it in a minimal amount and trying to get the most healthful type, which is typically grass-fed, pasture-raised meat. They have more omega-3s, less omega-6s, which are pro-inflammatory. All of those dietary factors weigh into our microbiome. That's all related. If you've got good gut health, it leads to good brain health. Those are fundamentals, and we're learning more and more that a lot of our brain health comes from our gut, and what we put in it makes a difference.
Right. It's really challenging when you have patients bringing in snacks that are food-like substance. A lot of chemicals in that.
If you can't identify it on your shelf or you cannot pronounce it, it's not a food. It is a food stuff.
Right. Michael Pollan's Food Rules is a really good resource, and we'll put some of those resources for healthy eating as well. So let's talk about physical activity, the third pillar. Many of the individuals I'm familiar with on this call are exercisers consistently. We live in Colorado, so it's a fairly healthy state, but let's talk about physical activity and, to some degree, the challenge of a long work day, coming home and taking care of the family, just trying to find the time to exercise. But tell us a little bit about the basics of physical activity, how it helps with our overall physical and mental health.
Yeah, so very important. But you also have to think about physical activity, not just necessarily a structured exercise, but just generally moving. There's been a lot of reports that have come out that sitting is the new health issue, that it could be as worse as smoking, I think is what I read. And so the key is getting movement throughout the day. So even if you are sitting, take breaks. Instead of phoning someone down the hall, walk up and go talk to them. Maybe even during your lunch break, go and, walk down the hall, walk down the stairs. There's little things you can do. The general guidelines, and this applies to our cancer patients, but also applies to general health and globally, is 150 minutes of moderate activity per week. Moderate activity is that which is considered where you can still talk, but you couldn't sing while you're doing it. And you break it up 30 minutes, 5 days a week is how I usually counsel my patients, but it doesn't have to be continuous. As long as you can get your heart rate up a little bit, you can do it in 5 and 10 minute stretches. It all counts as movement. And then what a lot of people are missing is the strength and resistance training. And the current health guidelines also state 2 workouts a week for strength, because as we get older, we lose upper body strength. And you want to make sure you're working all of your muscle groups. And again, exercise reduces inflammation. It also helps with our mental health. It keeps blood flowing. It reduces the risk of chronic diseases, including, dementia and Parkinson's. So,
and I think making an effort, given time limitations during a workday, to get up and walk down the hall to have a conversation with a colleague really speaks to the relational piece of mental health as well. Pick up the phone and make a call, or just instead of getting sucked into the technology.
Yep.
All right. So sleep hygiene. We know sleep is critical. It helps us process, it detoxifies. And with the pandemic, many of us aren't getting enough or good quality sleep, which is a time to detoxify and recover from our day. In many ways, there's a lot of research supporting its benefit. A lot of people, a lot of our patients, a lot of our colleagues struggle with it.
Yes.
If you work nights, there's a lot of research supporting how that impacts your longevity and overall health. So what are your thoughts on sleep hygiene?
Yeah, so this is, again, it's a core pillar for a reason. It's critical to our overall health. As you said, it is helps us detoxify. It helps us process the day, and it helps us set a stage to wake up in the morning fresh again. Again, it reduces inflammation. If you're not getting good sleep, you are more inflamed. It raises your cortisol levels. And frankly, you lose some of your inhibitions are down when you don't sleep very well. You're going to turn to comfort food. You might turn to more caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
So it's critical, important. And there's really, in our modern day, one of the big disruptors of sleep actually is our technology. We're constantly on our phones. So really one of the really important pieces to really think about and really reflect upon is, what is your screen time? What does that look like? And trying to put that away. But there's some really basic things you can do for sleep hygiene, making sure you have a dark, cold room, making sure your wake up and go to bed time are the same. Even on weekends, set that pattern. Watching your caffeine, not too late in the day, making sure that you exercise earlier in the day, but exercise helps sleep later.
Sure.
There's a plethora of things, but those are some of the basics.
So stress management. This is probably, in my mind, one of the bigger, more, what if broken, this pillar can certainly disrupt the structural integrity of mental and physical well-being. So talk to us a little bit about that, and then we'll go to some questions.
Okay. Yeah. So stress also leads into one of the other pillars that I didn't really highlight, but it falls into under resilience as well. And so we know we are constantly under stress. Certainly the pandemic has made it worse. But there are things we have control over and how we react to them. And there's some very basic things that can be easily taught, that are free. You can do them anywhere. There are simple things like breath work exercises. One that I love is called the 4-7-8 breath. You can find it on YouTube. Dr. Weil demonstrates it there. But you can find it in other places. Even thinking about meditation and mindfulness, even just 5 minutes a day, just sitting and trying to let your mind, just having no judgment, be in the present moment. There are multiple apps for this that can even guide you if your brain, you just can't shut it off. I love Insight Timer. I use it regularly, but Calm, Headspace are 2 other good ones. You can do journaling, you can do gratitude, you can do affirmations. I like going out in nature. I like walking my dogs outside without my phone. So these are all things we can do that we have control over, that helps with so many things.
Sure. So the biggest challenge is, how do we integrate? What would facilitate improving our physical and mental health, because all of these recommendations are wonderful, but the human factor
Yep.
illustrates that it's really hard to stick to these habits. So give us a little thought on that.
Well, I think the first thing is to start small and realize that you may have a health goal that may actually be considered an aspiration or what your outcome needs to be. So then you have to take that and break it down into very small, very easy, very simple steps. So, for instance, if you don't eat a lot of roots and vegetables, but you know they're good for you, okay, make your one goal be, today I'm going to have one vegetable, one serving of vegetable, and celebrate that success. But the other thing with these habits is you have to figure out where they are going to naturally fit into your day. So say you always eat breakfast at home. Okay, that's where you put that fruit or vegetable in your day. If you forget to floss, making sure you do it, put the floss out by your toothbrush at night. Little bitty steps so that you can celebrate when you get them. And then each step will build on another to get to the bigger goal.
And I'll jump in here for a second, Lisa, because I think you're really touching on something that is so critical and so important with respect to this concept of habits. And so something else that Dr. Albert and I will put in the PDF as a subsequent to this workshop are just some book recommendations on how to, identify, build, and sustain habits. So Tiny Habits is a great book. Atomic Habits is a great book. Look, Lisa has it right in front of her. Oh, and Kathy has Atomic Habits. As if we really didn't plan that, but it's so cool that they're right in front of us. It is so important to have the right tools to help you build the habit construct that you're talking about. Because the reality is, and I love the way you put it, Lisa, the aspirational nature of the habit. We all feel good about saying I'd love to do this, but if we're going to be successful, it's got to be tactical. And so these books, I think, help break down that conversation well.
And I think that's why most New Year's Eve resolutions fail, is they're too aspirational and they don't break them down into little steps to actually get there.
I'm still ready to do 26.2 miles. I just haven't done it yet. I hear you. You're right.
Have you bought walking shoes?
Exactly. So James Clear, who wrote the Atomic Habits, has a 1% rule. So anything that we do, it's always better to do it together. And again, that's why we're building the Healthcare Leadership Lab community. But his 1% rule is just do one little activity at a time, make it really easy, make it attractive, and scale up micro steps to your outcome as an individual, as a team. I think this would be really fun to get and would increase commitment if you had your colleagues do something with you. It's like Carrot Day. This is the start. But I'm called the hummus queen, so that's never a problem with me. But yeah, so the 1% rule is I found it really fascinating. Just every little thing we do. And he has a quote here which I love. He said, "Each time you show up, you cast another vote for the person you want to be in the life you want to have." So do something that supports who you want to be, what you want to do, what changes you want to make. And that's going to lend to us being, strengthening our integrity of self, our relationships, and building a community so we can pivot together. So let's see if there are any questions. One comment that we have from Athena, another one of my favorite people. She is overhauling her approach to physical activity via strength training and using her Apple Watch to help her close rings every single day. And it's been crucial and a positive change for her health. I'm not an Apple person, so maybe that's effective for some others.
Yeah, and I use my Fitbit. It reminds me at the top of the hour to get moving. So most of the time I do move if it tells me to, but there are those fitness apps out there that will kind of prompt you and,
I like to use the word.
Some people find them helpful. Some people find them stressful because then they're monitoring and they're getting so tied up in achieving those goals. You have to be careful sometimes with those, but
I like to think of it as incremental encouragement.
Yeah.
Right. And so the other thing too is, at the end of the day, you need to be accountable to yourself. And so these are just tools to help you be accountable to yourself. But putting yourself in the right mindset of accountability, I think is the most important first step. And then when you do that, so I love the fact that there are tools and apps and those things along the way. And Lisa, tell us, what do you think about how journaling fits into all of this? Because lots of people talked about the importance of journaling, and what are sort of your thoughts and reactions to that?
Yeah, so I periodically journal. It helps you kind of put things in perspective. Sometimes if you've got some pent up emotions, it helps you release them. Some people just journal 3 things they're grateful for. It just, again, puts you in that mindset. It helps you clear your mind. It helps you get perspective. So I'm a big fan of journaling. They make all kinds of journals. There's one particular podcaster, blogger, Gretchen Rubin. She does the Happiness Project, and she has a great little journal. I have it here on my desk called the Happiness Project. And you put 3 things, you put 1 line every day for what you're grateful for. And it's a quick little tool for someone who's not used to it and prompts you. But she has a great
Awesome.
about happiness and those kind of journaling things.
I want to shift gears a little bit. We have a few minutes left, but Lisa, you have worked in oncology for almost 20 years, just as I have, and you have a passion for integrative medicine. As an integrative health coach, I know you're working with a lot of cancer patients and using various modalities. If you were to have what would you offer for a healthcare provider? Because this is our population. We're struggling in a different way as our patients, but walk us through a conversation or engagement that you would have with someone who wants to make a healthy behavior change.
Yeah. So in general, health coaches, they can focus, but in general, they are walking alongside a person, and so they can help anybody. So I happen to have a niche for my cancer survivors, but like I said, these cross over to everybody and anybody, including healthcare providers. So I think the first place when you're working with someone is figure out where they are and meet them where they are, because everyone will be somewhere different. You also need to figure out what is their why. Why do they want to make this particular change? You may want to pull in some of the techniques of motivational interviewing to find out, do they have the ability to make the changes they're doing? Do they have the resources? Do they have a need? What's the need? Do they have that desire? Find out what their underlying motivations are. And Jeff mentioned to it earlier, you really have to listen to engage trust. That's really, really important. But then once you kind of get to those basics, figure out where they are, then start working with their goal. What is it they want to achieve? And then like we talked about earlier, seeing that big goal might be more of the outcome, and then trying to break it down into little steps. And that's what a coach does. They actually just support, they walk alongside, they hold a person accountable, including healthcare providers, that they have to show up every week on a call or a Zoom and take accountability for, did they implement the change they committed to? Have they done their homework? Where are they? If there were barriers, let's talk through them. But we're going to celebrate the successes, and then we'll build from there.
HCLL would be honored to be a platform for anyone in the healthcare community, anybody attending today who has colleagues or a group who would like to have accountability partners. I think this would be a really great happiness project. Jeff, I'm going to pull you back in. Mark Collins from Washington, D.C. made a comment earlier on how we ground ourselves in ethics and purpose in our work in healthcare. And I appreciate that too. I think one of the things that I struggle with, and many of my colleagues, and by virtue of dialogues I've had in the past, is finding the why I came into healthcare. I think with the pandemic and the dramatic shift that we've seen and experienced, some of it's been lost, our why. And that's why a lot of people are losing that joy in the workplace. So Lisa, thank you for bringing up discussing all these pillars, but I think it really boils down to our pivot back to our why for why we're in healthcare.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it's important also to mention as we get ready to close too, that burnout is an all-time high. And one kind of phrase that I really like is put your oxygen mask on first, because if you don't put it on for you, you cannot be present for those you're caring for. And that includes patients and your loved ones and family.
Mhm.
I got to say this. I think, Lisa, your content tonight was simply fantastic. The
Thank you.
dialogue was great. I know Kathy's going to close this up here in a second, but we can't say it enough. Thank you to the healthcare workers, those who are on the line. Share this video with those you work with, because we may have said it before and we'll say it again because it can't be said enough, but you absolutely matter. The work you do matters. The people you engage with are better because of your why and the reason that you have decided to be in service toward others, with others, and you've decided that your playing field, your court, is going to be in the court of healthcare, and you do it every day. And Lisa's 100% right. That oxygen mask belongs to you first. Your mental health matters. Today I was talking to my 10-year-old. He had a doctor's appointment, and we were talking about healthcare. And I said, healthcare, Papa, I said, mental health and physical health, it's all health, and it matters. And today, all of us have the opportunity to work on that. We got to take in some good breaths and recognize you for the great work that you do. Kathy, take us home.
Sure. Well, thank you, Lisa, so much. You offer so much insight. You're one of the most talented and skilled clinicians I know, and your perspective as an integrative health coach has been super valuable for us as healthcare workers. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We are honored to offer this platform for you. Taking care of your health is critical to you as a healthcare worker. And as Jeff mentioned, you matter and your health matters. And taking care of yourself will help you build resilience so you can persevere and endure the jobs that we love, why we're in healthcare. Examine the structural integrity of the 5 pillars, your 5 pillars of health. Start with tiny habits, 1% rule, every little bit change, find accountability partners, and rest, reflect, and recover. If you enjoyed or found value in today's presentation, please email us at info@healthcareleadershiplab.com. We would absolutely be honored to be part of your individual, team, or organizational growth and development. Our next Key Opinion Leader is 2 weeks from tonight, 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we are going to have Susan Ashley, who is one of my favorite social workers, licensed clinical social worker. And we are going to talk about the superpowers of tenderness and apology, helping people build and be part of a healthy workforce culture. We will send in a follow-up email, the summary of today's presentation, but also sign up and registration for that. If a difference needs to be made and you want to be part of that difference, you're in the right place. So if you're willing to lean in and do the work, become part of the HCLL community. We lift each other up when we care for our community. So let's continue to gather to support each other on our journeys. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.
Have a great night, y'all.